Hello again, everybody. So today's video is a video I've been meaning to make for a long time, and it is about my two bikes, my older bikes, and it's a video about what you should expect if you purchase one of these older bikes. And is it something for you? Is it something not for you? And I just want to make sure that you understand what it takes once you buy them, what you should look for, and basically what you should expect once you bring it home. The first thing I want to tell you is definitely make sure you listen to the whole video, because I'm going to go from the beginning to the end of when I purchased, starting with my favorite bike, Ruby, the day I bought it until today, and what it took to get here. Starting with that bike, I purchased it a couple years ago, paid $950 for the bike. Was in good running order when I was at the guy's house that I purchased it from. I did not ask any kind of questions. I basically took it for, like I said, a ride, and fell in love with it and brought it home. And definitely not what I should have did. Should have asked more questions. Should have asked when it was last serviced. Should have asked, has anything been changed on the bike? I got so excited about the bike, I honestly didn't care. I just wanted it and looked great. And I figured if it looks this great, then it's going to drive this great. And I'm not going to have to do anything and blah, blah, blah. And at the end of the day, no, that's not what happened. And I'm going to get into that now with you. So I had the bike delivered to my house, and right away noticed that there was a heavy gas smell, and it wasn't coming from anything else in the garage. It was definitely coming from this bike. So before I even got started doing anything, I went out on eBay and I found the service manual. Number one thing to do, go out and buy the service manual. I don't care if it's for that bike. I don't care if it's for that bike. I don't care which bike it is. Go out and buy the service manual. Get familiar with the bike. Get familiar with the things that it takes in order to maintain it. I don't know how many times I've seen while watching YouTube people ask basic questions like, how do you take the panels off? Or how do you do this really minuscule thing? Because they don't want to take the time to buying a $30 or $40 service manual. And I have a hard time watching YouTube and taking anybody's word for it. Everything that I do on my bikes is always referenced from YouTube, which is great. But I reference it and then I look at the service manual to see if the guy was doing it correctly. I highly recommend you do that. The service manual will tell you so many things about the bike, how to maintain it, fluid wise, or taking panels off, or how to inspect certain things. Buy a service manual. So I did purchase a service manual for this bike, and I was able to figure out how to take the panels off right away, because I have basic knowledge on the bikes. I did, in the past, and I do now as well. Right away, I noticed that the float bowl was leaking gas. So I knew that the gasket set was going to be one thing I was going to have to buy. When you have the panels on the bike, you can't see all these different things. So you're taking a lot of the word from the person that you purchased it from. You're taking their word that everything is in running order. Of course, that's not going to be the case when you bring it home if it's a bike this old. So, I found that I needed to replace that gasket set. I looked at the petcock. The petcock had been altered. It no longer was working. So I knew I was going to have to replace that. I took a very close look at the tires. These tires, they are tubeless tires. The side walls were heavily cracked. Okay, these are things I didn't look at when I was in the garage. But to be honest with you, I was ready to do these things for the bike anyways. Once I brought it home, I knew I was going to have to spend a little bit of money. That part I knew. I knew at least that something was going to have to be done on it. It wasn't going to be perfect. So, again, tires looked awful. Took the air filter out. That's when I first noticed that the air box, which I get into one of my other videos, the air box had been completely cracked up. So the air filter, not only that had to be replaced, but somewhere down the line, actually just recently, I found a new air box that had to be replaced. When I took off the transmission cover, I took a closer inspection at the rollers. They had flat spots. I don't know how they had flat spots. They only had 900 miles on the bike, but they had flat spots. I'm assuming it was because of all the grease that was packed into the variator, which of course, it was when Honda was in their infancy of the CVT, they made the huge mistake of packing the variator with grease, which, they don't do it on any of their bikes now. Nobody does. So I think the flat spots came because they just weren't moving well enough within that grease. So had to remove all the grease, clean that all up, remove the back plate off the back of the variator. So that was running well. The actual belt, which again, belt only had 900 miles, but belt, because of being for years just sitting there, depending on the environment the bike was stored in, the belt was all cracked up. Spark plug needed to be replaced. The battery was barely holding a charge. Trying to think here. Clutch pads, after further inspection, I needed to have those resurfaced. The gas cap, I could tell when you turn the gas cap that it wasn't making a real good seat. And when I took that off, I had to replace the sealing ring for the gas cap. So all these different things are starting to add up in cost. By the time I was done and the work that I did, you had to take the carburetor apart, clean all that out. The oil in it was like sludge. The coolant came out incredibly black. It needed to be replaced. But these are all the things that added up probably at the end of the day to $300 or $400 worth of work. Keep in mind, when you buy one of these older bikes, you are not going to be able to take it to Honda. Honda is going to tell you, no, we don't service those anymore. So you don't have that as an option. You could still take, the 2010 Elite there to get fixed. Sure, there's guys there that'll fix that. Or the Ruckus that's sitting next to me. You could take that there, of course. If you don't want to do the service, you have that as an option. You do not have that as an option on these older bikes. So when you think about that, okay, now I don't have anywhere I can take it. That puts even more ownership on you buying one of these, that you're going to have to service it yourself or find somebody who's going to service it for you, but you no longer have Honda as an option. So, after I had done what I did on this bike, put in, like I said, all these items, $300, $400, no longer is the bike at $950 anymore. Now you're talking about you're into the $1,400 range after you fixed it all up. So one of the big things I want to tell you is don't get hung up on how many miles it has. These bikes, this bike in particular, you could run this bike 20,000 miles. And, you're going to have to service it, of course, under that 20,000, but you can get all those miles out of it. A lot of people, what they do is they'll look, like that one had 1,700 miles, this one had 900, is they're going to look at the ad and say, okay, it's got no miles on it. Ooh, look at a Spree. It's a 1986 Spree. It's only got 200 miles on it. That's great. You get it home, you better make sure that you're able to service it, because I guarantee you that Spree, nobody's done anything to it for 35 years. It just sat in somebody's garage and they finally decided to sell it. So everything I just mentioned to you for this Honda 125, you're probably going to have to do on that bike. So don't get hung up on how many miles it is. It doesn't matter. If it's got 1,000 miles or 1,500 miles on it and somebody serviced it, that's a much better investment, because now you have a bike you don't have to do anything to right away. So that's where those big questions come into play. What have you done to it? Who has serviced it? Where should I take it if I need to get it serviced? You need to know all those things. Get familiar with the service manual. So back to Ruby. Once I did all those things, the bike ran 1,000,000 times better. Putting in some better oil, putting in some nice new coolant, all those things that are basic maintenance, the bike ran great. Plus then again, the tires, it's not exactly easy to replace the tires on these small rims. I'll tell you that. It's not like a bigger motorcycle rim when you have, 15-inch rim or bigger. It's much easier. So be patient if you're going to replace the tires yourself. It's not exactly the simplest thing to do. That's one of the things that was probably the hardest to do. And that's not super hard, but just to warn you. Other things that I had to do on the bike, I replaced the headlight on this, as you guys know from other videos, the tail light, and I did other things. But when it comes down to, at the end of the day, and to end this video, I want to make sure you understand, when you buy one of these, don't get hung up on the mileage. Make sure you buy a service manual. Be prepared to put a few $100s into the bike, because more than likely it's going to need it if it's old. And just enjoy the hobby like I have. You know, this bike, like I said, 84, 30 some years old. Love riding it around the neighborhood. You know, it catches everybody's eye with that pop-up headlight. But it wasn't like I just pulled it in my garage and I got there. You know, you have a lot of adjusting, you have a lot of things that you got to do. And hopefully this video is going to prepare you for what you're going to do and what you're going to see, and prepare you for buying one of these older bikes. So this is the first volume, which is for Ruby, what you should expect and what you should see if you purchase an old bike. And the next volume, I'll go over what I encountered on my Elite 50S. So that's all I have. If anybody has any questions about anything, please let me know. You know, if you see something and you want to buy it, I don't mind helping you if I can. Again, I am not a Honda mechanic. I'm just your everyday guy who really enjoys the hobby, really enjoys these old bikes, and I take the proper time to learn how to maintenance them properly. So I want to make sure that everybody is aware. There are people who are definitely more skilled in this than me. I'm never going to say to you that I know more than anybody else. But what I will say to you is I'm very familiar now with the service manual for this bike. I'm familiar with what needs to happen in order to maintain it. And going forward, I know what I need to do over the long run to be able to enjoy the bike. So that's going to finish this video. If you have any questions, please let me know. And if you like my channel, please subscribe. And thanks for watching the evolution of Ruby the Elite.